Welcome back to Lowe's Angels, where dramatic begging on knees and scandalous cooch sleepovers are driving everyone completely insane today on The Bold and the Beautiful. Taylor Hayes becomes deeply concerned about Sheila's relentless determination to force her way back into Finn's life. She confronts Finn directly, questioning how he truly feels about his mother and taking a hard stance alongside Steffi. Despite Finn's attempts to calm her nerves, Taylor remains intensely uneasy, worrying that Finn's defenses are weakening and that Sheila isn't going to back down without a fight. John Finn Finnegan finds himself on the hot seat with Taylor. While he insists that Steffi, Hayes and Kelly are his absolute top priority, he drops a bombshell by admitting he believes Sheila may have genuinely changed. Finn considers whether giving Sheila a small place in their lives could actually benefit everyone, but his willingness to soften toward his biological mother puts him on a dangerous collision course with his wife. Sheila Carter refuses to walk away and takes her desperation to an extreme new level, determined to build a bond with Finn and little Hayes. Sheila literally gets down on her knees and begs Steffi for forgiveness. Her dramatic, emotional plea puts immense pressure on the family, especially as she senses Finn's growing sympathy opening a tiny door for her. Steffi Forrester Finnegan is left reeling after Sheila drops to her knees to beg for mercy. While Steffi remains fiercely protective of Hayes and Kelly and adamantly opposed to letting Sheila anywhere near her children, Finn's changing perspective creates a terrifying new rift in her marriage. Backed by Taylor, Steffi is forced to defend her family boundaries against both Sheila's persistence and her husband's dangerous optimism. Melissa Dillon doubles down on her romantic pursuit of Will Spencer, fiercely rejecting the idea that her feelings are just an obsession. Confident and defiant, Dillon drops a massive bombshell to Elektra by revealing she already spent the night at Will's house. Even though the encounter was relatively innocent, they just made out and fell asleep on the couch. Dillon makes it clear she wants a far more passionate future with Will and has zero intention of backing off. Elektra Forrester explodes in anger over Dillon's relentless pursuit of Will. Already furious about Dillon declaring her love, Elektra reaches a boiling point upon learning about their late-night cooch session. Viewing Dillon as an immediate threat to her relationship, Elektra is gearing up for an all-out war as their rivalry turns downright explosive. Will Spencer finds himself trapped right in the center of a chaotic tug-of-war between Dillon and Elektra. Having shared undeniable physical chemistry and a late-night make-out session with Dillon, Will's private choices are now igniting major drama, and he will soon be forced to decide where his true loyalty lies before the conflict completely destroys his love life. If Finn lets Sheila's theatrical kneeling routine blind him to who she really is, Steffi is going to end up packing her bags and leaving him in the dust. Wild prediction. What if Finn secretly agrees to let Sheila have one short, supervised visit with Hayes behind Steffi's back, only for Sheila to intentionally leak the secret to Taylor just to blow up Finn and Steffi's marriage from the inside out? Imagine the heartbreak if Sheila uses Finn's trust as the ultimate weapon to drive Steffi away for good. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved today's breakdown, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment down below to share your thoughts. Now I want to hear from you fans. Do you think Finn is being completely naive for believing Sheila has actually changed, or is Steffi being too rigid? And who do you think will belongs with Elektra or Dillon? Let me know what you think in the comments. The only Logan who matters, Catherine Kelly Lang, Brooke Logan and the fight over family name. There's a moment in the current storyline where Brooke Logan looks at her own sister and essentially says out loud, "You don't get to our last name for your fashion line, because I'm the only Logan who actually matters in this industry. And I want you to sit with how genuinely brutal that is for a second, because that's not a business rival she's saying that to, that's Katie. That's her sister and Brooks saying it anyway with what sounds like complete conviction, and I think that single moment tells you almost everything you need to know about who this character has been for close to 40 years now. She's not fighting Katie because she thinks Katie's untalented or undeserving. She's fighting Katie because Brooke has spent decades building an identity where Logan and Brooke are functionally the same word, and she is not under any circumstances prepared to share that. That's the thing about legacy characters on soaps that have been running since the actual launch of the show. They don't just occupy storylines. They become load-bearing walls for the entire structure, and Catherine Kelly Lang is about as load-bearing as it gets on this particular show, because she's one of exactly two people left from the original 1987 cast still standing in front of the cameras. John McCook is the other one. Everybody else from that first episode is gone, recast, retired, or written out entirely, and it's just these two left still doing this decade after decade, which, when you actually stop and think about it, is a pretty remarkable thing for two human beings to have done with this much of their working lives. Where Lang actually comes from. Catherine Kelly Lang was born July 13, 1961, in Chicago. Funny enough, same city Michelle Stafford came out of, different decade, completely different career track. But there's something almost amusing about how many of these genre City and Los Angeles soap dynasties trace back to the same handful of Midwestern cities. Before acting, she was a model, which is a pretty standard entry point for this generation of soap actresses, but she was also, and this is the detail I think doesn't get enough airtime, a serious equestrian, not a hobbyist, someone who's spoken publicly and repeatedly about actual competitive riding and training, which isn't the kind of thing you do casually on the side of a full-time acting career. That takes real time, real physical commitment, years of it. And I think that equestrian background actually bleeds into how she plays Brooke. Way that's hard to fully articulate, but easy to notice once you know to look for it. There's a physical confidence to the character, a kind of steady, doesn't flinch easily presence that I guess comes at least partly from someone who spent decades controlling half-ton animals for fun. I'm speculating a little there, I'll admit. That's my read and not something explicitly stated anywhere, but it tracks. She joined Bold and the Beautiful in 1987 at the actual launch of the show, and just never left. Same deal as McCook, structurally speaking, no recast, no multi-year gap where somebody else played Brooke while Lang went and did something else. One actress, one character, continuously for coming up on 40 years now. When you're talking about daytime television, a genre that's genuinely brutal about turnover, about characters getting killed off or quietly written out whenever a show needs to shake up its cast, that kind of unbroken tenure is not the norm. It's the exception that basically defines what people mean when they say a character has become an institution. The awards question, and where I have to be honest with you, here's where I want to flag something rather than just plough past it because I think it matters. The material I've got in front of me on Lang's heavily into legacy and longevity. The nearly 4-decade run, the original cast status, without giving me a clean, detailed rundown of specific award wins the way I had for, say, Michelle Stafford's 3 Emmys or John McCook's 3 Emmys with actual years attached. I don't want to just invent a parallel trophy case for Lang that sounds tidy and satisfying, but isn't actually backed by anything solid in front of me. What I can tell you honestly is that she's widely treated, across the coverage I've got, as one of daytime's most recognized leading women, essential to the show's identity in a way that goes beyond any single award, whether that recognition includes the same volume of hardware as some of her longtime castmates, I genuinely can't confirm from what I've got here. So I'd rather leave that specific question open than paper over the gap with a number I can't back up. What we know about her life outside the studio, Lang's personal life, at least the publicly documented parts of it, centers heavily on that equestrian world I mentioned. She's talked openly about riding and competing, and in 2022 she actually suffered a serious injury, broke her ankle in a horseback riding accident. Required surgery to fix it. That's not a small thing. Ankle fractures requiring surgical repair are a real recovery process, and doing that while presumably still trying to maintain a filming schedule on a daily soap is genuinely demanding in a way I don't think gets talked about enough when people discuss what it actually costs physically to sustain a decades-long run on a show like this. Beyond that, the material I've got stays pretty focused on her professional life, rather than digging into deeper personal territory, which honestly I think that's fine. I'd rather respect that boundary than go fishing for details that aren't clearly confirmed, and same as always, I don't have a reliable net worth figure for her, so I'm not going to hand you some made-up number from a celebrity finance site pretending it's fact. What's reasonable to infer just from the shape of the career, nearly 40 years, as a lead actress on a major, ratings-relevant daytime soap, is a stable, substantial, long-term income, but that's inference built on career shape, not a documented figure, and I want to be upfront about that difference every single time this comes up, because I think handing you confident-sounding fake numbers would be worse than just telling you honestly what I don't know. Brooke Logan, the character underneath 4 decades of storylines. So let's actually get into who Brooke is, because I think there's a version of this conversation that just lists she's been on the show a long time and calls it a day. And that undersells how genuinely complicated this character has been allowed to be over the years. Her core traits, the ones the writers keep returning to across decades of material: passionate, idealistic, romantic, stubborn, loyal, ambitious, emotionally intense. Read through that list again and notice, same as I pointed out with Eric Forrester actually, how many of those traits are fundamentally in tension with each other. Idealistic and ambitious don't always play nice together, romantic and stubborn definitely don't, especially not when you're talking about someone whose romantic history involves as many reversals and reconciliations as Brooks does. She started, way back at the beginning, as a young romantic figure and evolved. This is the classic soap trajectory, and I don't think it's an accident that both Brooke and Eric follow roughly the same arc shape despite being written by different people across different decades. From young romantic lead into fashion powerhouse into full-blown family matriarch, multiple marriages along the way, children who have grown up to become major characters in their own right, Ridge and Hope chief among them. Which means Brooke's not just a standalone character anymore, she's the hub of an entire second generation of storylines that wouldn't exist without her. Ridge and the destiny of it all. I have to talk about Ridge Forrester here, because you genuinely cannot discuss Brooke Logan for any length of time without him entering the conversation, the same way you can't talk about Eric Forrester's family without immediately running into the Logan Forrester tangle. Brooke and Ridge have this on and off relationship that the show has, for decades now, framed explicitly as destiny. That's the actual word the storylines keep circling back to: destiny. Like there's some cosmic inevitability pulling these two people back together, no matter how many times they split up, marry other people, have children with other partners, and swear they are finally done with each other for good. And look, I'll be honest, I don't have the full blow-by-blow chronology of every single Brooke Ridge breakup and reunion sitting in front of me right now. That's decades of material, multiple marriages between them alone, and I'm not going to pretend I can walk you through every specific turn without risking getting details wrong. What is clear, and what matters for understanding the character, is that this destiny narrative has functioned as one of the show's most durable emotional engines, something the writers can dial up or down depending on what era of the show you're watching, but never fully retire. Because too much of Brooke's identity at this point is wrapped up in her history with this one man, which brings us to the current wrinkle. Because right now Ridge is involved with Taylor, not Brooke, and that's clearly keeping Brooke emotionally off balance even as she's simultaneously fighting a completely separate battle on the business side of her life. I think that's actually a pretty sharp piece of structural writing, whether it's intentional dual pressure plotting or just how the storylines happen to line up this particular season. Brooke's getting squeezed on both fronts at once, romantic and professional, at the exact same time. Which is exactly the kind of pressure that tends to produce the most interesting version of a character like this. She doesn't get to retreat into business as a safe harbor from heartbreak because business is currently on fire too, the Katie fight and what it's actually about underneath the surface. Let's get into the current headline conflict properly, because I think it's more interesting than a simple sibling spat over a company name. Katie's launching, or trying to launch, some version of a Logan fashion brand, and Brooke's reaction is unmeasured, isn't diplomatic. It's her flatly asserting that she's the only Logan who's actually relevant in fashion and that Katie doesn't get to borrow the family name for her own venture. Recent spoiler coverage suggests this is escalating too, that there's another blow-up between them still coming, so this isn't a contained one-episode conflict. This is building towards something bigger. Here's my actual read on why this fight matters more than it looks like on the surface. Brooke's entire adult identity has been built on being the Logan who made it in fashion, the one who clawed her way from wherever she started into genuine power inside the Forrester world. Decades of history backing up that specific claim to relevance. Katie trying to launch her own version of that under the same family name isn't just a business decision that happens to inconvenience Brooke. It's a direct challenge to the uniqueness of Brooke's entire self-concept. If there can be two relevant Logans in fashion, then Brooke's specialness, the thing she spent 40 years building, suddenly isn't as singular as she's always needed it to be. That's not really a fight about a logo or a brand name. That's a fight about whether Brooke Logan is still the only one of her, and I think there's something a little sad buried underneath the aggression of that. Honestly, if you sit with it for a second, a soap news outlet actually framed it well, calling it both a power claim and a loneliness statement in the same breath. And I think that's exactly right. Insisting you're the only relevant one in your own family isn't just an assertion of dominance, It's also, quietly, an admission that you need to be irreplaceable because the alternative, being just one of several capable Logans, feels like erasure to her. That's a very specific, very human kind of insecurity dressed up as a business feud, and I think it's one of the more psychologically honest things this current storyline's doing. Her power and how it actually works. Brooke's power in this universe doesn't come from a title the way you might expect, and I think that's worth being precise about. She's not always sitting in the CEO chair. Her power is more diffuse than that, more woven into the actual fabric of both the Logan family and the Forrester families simultaneously, because she spent decades positioned at the intersection of both. Every major decision either family makes has some Brooke-shaped gravity pulling on it, whether she's got a formal title attached to the moment or not. That's a harder kind of power to take away from somebody than a corner office is. Because you can fire someone from a job, it's a lot harder to fire someone from 4 decades of relational entanglement, with basically every major player in 2 intertwined dynasties. The current fashion brand fight is actually a pretty direct demonstration of that. She's not fighting Katie with a lawsuit or a boardroom vote necessarily. From what the coverage suggests, she's fighting with the sheer emotional and reputational weight of having been the logo associated with fashion success for this many decades already. That's brand power in the truest sense, except the brand is just her own name and history. What's actually unusual here, I think the single fact that deserves the most attention, the one that genuinely sets Lang apart even within a genre full of long-tenured actors, is the original cast status specifically. There's a real difference between an actor who's had a long run on a role, even an exceptionally long one, and an actor who's been there since the literal episode with zero interruption. Michelle Stafford's had a long, celebrated run as Phillies, but it's been in 3 separate chunks with real gaps in between. Lang's run has no gaps. She and McCook are the only 2 people who can say they were there on day 1 of Bold and the Beautiful and they're still there now, which means between the 2 of them, they're basically carrying the entire institutional memory of this show's, beginning inside 2 ongoing, continuously updated performances. That's genuinely rare, and I don't think it gets discussed with the weight it deserves, mostly because longevity in daytime gets treated as a background fact rather than the achievement it actually is. 40 years of showing up, of staying relevant to the writers, of not getting quietly phased out the way so many original cast members on so many other long-running soaps eventually do. That's not passive. That takes an actor who keeps giving the writers something worth building new material around. Decade after decade, which is exactly what seems to be happening again right now with this Katie storyline, my actual take on where this goes. So here's where I land, and I'll say it plainly because I don't think this needs a lot of qualifying language wrapped around it. Brooke wins the Katie fight, not because Katie's grown to want her own thing. And honestly, I think there's a reasonable read where Katie deserves some claim to the family name too. She's a Logan same as Brooke is. That's not nothing but narratively structurally, this show is not going to let its original cast, nearly 40-year lead, get functionally replaced or diminished by a sibling storyline. That's just not how legacy characters get treated on soaps that have this much invested in them. I think we're watching a fight Brooke's going to win, probably messily, probably with some genuinely ugly scenes between the sisters before it resolves, but win nonetheless because the show needs Brooke to remain the singular Logan the same way it needs Eric to remain the founder whose name is on the building. Where I think the more interesting question actually lies is the Ridge situation, because that one doesn't have the same structural guarantee attached to it. Destiny narratives can run for decades, sure, but they can also, eventually, just stop. And I don't think there's any law of soap physics that says Brooke and Ridge have to end up back together one more time just because they always have. Before, my honest bet though is that they do eventually, because destiny as a storytelling device on this particular show has never actually meant true in any permanent sense. It's not recurring, and recurring is exactly what it's going to keep doing. I don't think that's lazy writing, for what it's worth. I think it's just an accurate reflection of what these 2 characters actually are to each other at this point, which is less a couple and more a gravitational field that everybody else's relationships have to orbit around eventually. Catherine Kelly Lang's been playing this woman since 1987, no gaps, no interruptions, and she's still out here right now fighting her own sister over a last name like it's the most urgent thing in the world, because to Brooke it genuinely is. That's the whole character in one image, honestly. Almost 4 decades in and she still can't stand the idea of not being the only one who matters. I don't think she's wrong to fight for it. I just think it's going to cost her something with Kitty before this is over, and I don't think Brooke's going to care nearly as much as she probably should. That's Catherine Kelly Lang,